Hi guys, it's me, Ryan.
And Maria.
We're gonna try something different today. Today we're gonna be talking about mental health advocacy.
Because May is Mental Health Month.
Many of us have been struggling with our mental health since the beginning of the pandemic. And I know that sounds like a lot of really big words and really big phrases and kind of a scary way of looking at it. But oh goodness gracious, now I'm just adding new slides. That's not what I was trying to do. I want everybody here to know that this has not been my best day to get. So I'm here. But struggling with mental health can be anything as small as, feeling down, right? Having a rough couple of weeks, or feeling a lot of stress, or feeling more anxious than usual, right? Like for me, right now that many of us have been vaccinated and going out into the community doesn't require masks as much, like I feel a lot more anxiety about going out into public, right? Because there are bigger groups of people now, right? So mental health is not just, the stuff you see on TV. It's not just the big, scary, diagnoses, those big things that you think of when you think of mental health. It can be smaller things like that, which we've talked about before in like our self-preservation video and some of the other areas. I think even in the domestic violence video, we talk a lot about caring, like self-care and kind of being kind to yourself. So much of that is the basics of mental health advocacy, right? Both out in the public and kind of within your own head, within your family.
That's the
one I added. Land acknowledgement, as always, North America has a long and kind of tragic history, definitely tragic history. And it is worth knowing some of the Native peoples who lived here before us and some of the Native people who continue to live here. I don't know that I have been actually adding that link into the descriptions. I need to make sure to do that this time. But please, if you're interested, do some research on some of the Hill Country Native American tribes. There are, like, a lot of them have powwows in the fall, which is really cool. You can go and actually experience some Native American traditions firsthand if that is something that is interesting to you. Okay, so today's agenda: what is a mental health advocate? We're going to talk a little bit about stigma, how can you become an advocate, and then some very basic resources. Mental health has to be a priority. Your mental health impacts everything. It impacts your physical health. It impacts your frustration tolerance. It impacts your ability to, it impacts your resilience, your ability to kind of roll with the punches and come up with new solutions when life is complicated, right? That is all impacted by some of our mental health needs.
And also physical health.
Yes.
Because you get sicker if you don't take care of your mental health.
Oh, yes. Yeah, a couple of years ago, I was going through a tough time and started putting things like milk in the cabinet.
Oh, no.
And I went to my husband at the time and I was like, I'm having a harder time than I realized.
That's the first step.
Yeah, being aware that all the stuff I was going through and all the stressors in my life was literally taking all of like my mental energy.
Exactly.
Okay, so what is a mental health advocate? Do you want to talk about this?
Sure. So mental health advocates are heroes. So they're individuals that help share their stories and help those who are struggling with mental health issues. They take risk and show their vulnerability by telling their truth in hopes of encouraging someone else. Whether it's through like a blog or social media, or just like having conversations with us or having conversations with your neighbors. They remind us that we're not alone in our struggles and that everyone is struggling with something. And also they remind us that we are not a fault. How do you say that?
A what?
At fault. I was like, oh. They remind us that there's light, healing, and hope through this journey. And they shatter stereotypes and stigmas associated with mental health. So basically everyone can be a mental health advocate. Can you talk a little bit about what an advocate is, just for everyone?
Yes, absolutely. So we have a whole series of videos that we will be recording over the next week or so about different areas of advocacy. And advocacy is, I think at its heart, it's about saying the thing that goes unsaid, right? So it is, if you, like in this particular case, mental health advocate, for me, talking about, hey, I know that I'm having a hard time right now, and pointing that out to somebody else in my life who can be there for me was an aspect of me advocating for myself. I was acknowledging what was going on and letting my partner know that something has gone kind of awry with me. It can be calling to schedule an appointment to talk through a need that you have. It can be, calling Lone Star Circle of Care and setting up therapy sessions. It can be going to a friend's house, right? If you're having a bad day or you're having trouble getting out of bed and you have a neighbor that you're really close with and you go down and you're just going to chat and talk for an hour or watch a TV show together, right? That can be a way that you're advocating for yourself, because you are acknowledging that there is a thing that is happening and then you are doing something about it. And advocacy happens kind of in all. Advocacy can be as small as that. It can also be as big as recognizing that there's something wrong with the health insurance system, right? And not being able to get a psychiatrist that's on your health insurance, right? And having to go all the way up to the higher ups at the health insurance company to demand that you have access to that service because you have the right to that service because you're paying for that service. It can be going down to the Capitol and lobbying for your experiences. It can be a wide variety of things, but don't let the word advocate
scare you.
Scare you or be overwhelming, right? Because so much of it really is about that smaller stuff. It's about talking to a friend and going, you know what, I've been through that. Like, this is how it was for me. How is it for you?
Exactly.
And when you are doing that, just always make sure that you're making the space for the people around you and what they're feeling and their experiences, because almost all of us experience this stuff differently. There may be some things that are similar, but there are definitely things that are different. And that is always worth knowing. Stigma. So we stand up and fight for those who are suffering in silence. I like that. So stigma is also another big word.
I know. It is.
This presentation has a lot of big words. So stigmas can be as simple as labeling. I don't know if I've had this conversation with many of you, but I hate labeling. Hate it. I will never label a child as manipulative. I won't do it. I won't label a young kid as aggressive for a lot of the same reason. Because once you have an idea that a person is a thing based on a label, you tend to treat them that way, right? So young kids that are struggling in school because maybe they're going through some stuff at home get labeled as bad kids. And once they're labeled as bad kids, they're treated differently. And there's a stigma attached to that, right? Because then once they're being treated differently, it becomes that child's inner voice. The child then begins to think, well, I'm bad. This is all I can be. And so they act accordingly, right? It becomes a bit of this self-fulfilling prophecy. Stigmas are also something as simple as going, hey, I am depressed, right? There's a lot of a lot of stigmas around depression and anxiety and
mental health
in general.
Right.
I was going to say but especially like the bigger diagnoses, psychosis or schizophrenia, or I don't think personality disorders really have one because they're not really as commonly talked about. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, right? There's a whole lot of, I'm just a little bit OCD. You may be, you also may not be. You may be looking at some of your behaviors and seeing them in a certain way. Or autism. Autism's the big one. That's really where I should have gone. That is the biggest one that has a lot of stigma.
Yeah, it does.
Because, somebody's diagnosed with autism and like, what is the first thing that pops into your head when I say that? Right? It's probably not the guy who has been working at Apple for, 30 years doing programming, right? It's probably, I don't know, some horrible portrayal on TV. I have an example from my own personal life, but that's all confidential. And it's not something that I would share in a YouTube video, but I mean, it's probably somebody who is lower functioning, or it's probably like Rain Man.
I don't know who that is.
The Dustin Hoffman character from like 20 years ago.
Okay, yeah, I don't know.
He was really good with numbers.
Okay, I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Okay.
But it is worth knowing. It is worth asking yourself when you hear those words, when you hear words like they're struggling with depression, or they're struggling with anxiety, or they're struggling with schizophrenia. And note how I'm saying they're struggling with, not saying they're depressed, they're anxious, or they're schizophrenic. that way, saying they're schizophrenic, that's it. That's labeling them. Saying they're struggling with schizophrenia means that they are learning how to manage symptoms related to that diagnosis. It gives some distance, right? It allows that person to exist both with that diagnosis and not as only that diagnosis.
Exactly.
So it is worth knowing, it is worth stopping here and thinking about, how do you react? What is your first thought? What is your first impression? What is your first emotion?
Yeah.
When I say some of that, when I say that person's struggling with depression, like what is the first thing that pops into your head when you think about somebody who's depressed, right? Odds are some of that is going to be related to some of the stigmas that exist in society. I can spend, like, once again, I can spend a lot more time talking about stigmas and how we view people who are struggling with stuff, struggling with mental health diagnoses and symptoms, right? I can spend a lot more time talking about that. But I think the biggest piece of advice I would give anybody here is to stop and think about, what does that make you think? Because once you start reflecting on it, then I think it gets easier to start asking people the next question, which is, okay, so you're struggling with depression. What does that mean to you? What does that look like to you? Right? Because it doesn't look the same for everybody.
Exactly.
Right? My version of anxiety is different from my mother's version of anxiety, which is super weird because I was raised in the same house and I was taught that pattern of behaviors. But we both deal with it differently because I didn't like how she dealt with it. So apparently I chose a whole different set of behaviors. But that question is a way that we can advocate for people by first starting to understand, beginning to ask, what does that look like if they want to talk to you about it?
And normalizing their experience,
Exactly.
so they don't feel like they're the only ones with that. Because a lot of people are dealing with this mental health disorder. So it's normalizing the experience, like accepting, like making them feel that they can be heard.
Yes.
And then asking them, how can I serve you? How can I help you? Is there anything that you want me to do? And then whatever they need. You know.
Absolutely. I think that's all on stigma right now.
Yeah.
If you guys have any additional questions about it, I'm happy to talk more about it. I think it is an interesting and fascinating conversation that is not just limited to mental health advocacy or mental health disorders or diagnoses. Addiction is another one that has a lot of negative stigmas around it, a lot of labeling, and it impacts people. Oh, I was going to say validation.
Validation.
But it impacts people's ability to ask for help when society has labeled them as something and are treating them a certain way. And that's at, I think, the heart of everything we do. That is the thing we are trying to move away from. We are trying to make a space where people feel like they can come and say, hey, maybe I could use some help, or hey, maybe somebody can offer a solution that I haven't thought of.
Exactly.
So how can I become an advocate? So I like here the very first sentence is, you do not have to share your deepest, darkest secrets on social media to become an advocate. I think that's been a bit of a move lately. There's been a bit of a movement on social media to go out there and just put it all out. I'm going to write an essay on everything I've ever felt in this particular area and how that impacted my life. Which is awesome if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, if that's what you want to do, go ahead and do it. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, you don't have to do. That's why it's there. Like you don't feel pressure to do that. You don't have to.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's one of those things that as social workers, like specifically, we can't do, right? So when I'm meeting with clients, a lot of times, like I can't sit there. I'm not going to sit there and tell you everything I've ever gone through or everything I've ever seen, because that's not my time, right? It is your time.
Yeah.
And what I can do is be there and I can empathize and I can offer some small kind of examples of how your experience isn't uncommon, right? I can provide reassurance for that, along with the validation and normalization of those experiences. So you can stand up for others by sharing your story privately with a friend, neighbor, or loved one. That has also been happening kind of in conjunction with the first part during the Me Too movement, with all of the abuse women are typically, most women are experiencing at some point in their lives. For a long time, we all thought, sorry about the barking, that it was kind of it was an individual thing, right? That it wasn't as systematic. It wasn't as widespread as it was. And over the last 20 years, like that has become just exposed as being like this total lie, right? Like most of us have experienced something. And when we sit down, when we finally start talking about that experience with a sister or a best friend or a mom, aunt, whoever, right? Like 9 times out of 10, they have the experience too, right? And all of a sudden you go from being isolated to being part of a community.
Exactly.
And it doesn't always have to happen that way, right? If you have somebody come to you and say, hey, I'm dealing with this, and you've never dealt with anything like that, but you can, that question, like, tell me what that's like for you. Share with me. Like, I can't understand everything, right? Because I haven't gone through it, but I can begin to understand if you share your experience with me.
Yeah, and there's some actionable steps over here in the bullet points. It said you can support someone who needs help, or just like listening to them, or like anything, like asking them what they need. Volunteer for a local mental health organization. I know someone in the community right now is actually volunteering with an organization in town that provides mental health services, so that's a great step.
Yep.
You can also attend an awareness walk or other events benefiting the mental health movement. I know last year I did a 5K that was for awareness of like people recovering from substance use, so that was really amazing. You can also encourage your local politicians to prioritize mental health, and that you can, with this step, you can call or email your legislature. But I can't say that word. And if you're interested in that, we can provide, reach out to Ryan or me, and then we can provide you like a phone number and like an email template if you feel like you want to do this. If not, that's totally okay. And then you can also correct those who use stigmatizing language. So for example, if someone says something like, oh, she's just crazy, referring to like I don't know, an anxiety or whatever.
Yeah, just anybody who's struggling.
Yeah, anybody who's struggling, you can say like, you can correct them and being like, well, actually, and just have a conversation about it, removing stigma and like normalizing the experience. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and I do want to backtrack to this last sentence that's up here in the paragraph where it just says you don't have to share your story if you're not yet ready. Like, that is also, your story is your story, right? That is not something you have to share in order to be there for friends and family. It is also really, really important to know when something is kind of out of your depth, right? So if you are friends with somebody who is really, really struggling and they're starting to make comments that make you uncomfortable, or you're worried that they may, hurt themselves or hurt somebody else, or, may hurt their kids or something, that's a really, like, at that point, even if they won't get additional help, like, you can always like shoot me a message and say, hey, I've got this friend who could use some extra support. And I'm always happy to reach out and to try to provide that extra support, because your job as being a mental health advocate, both for others and for yourself, right? Because all of these skills and steps are also really, really applicable for yourself. Definitely refer them, encourage them to call, a doctor, encourage them to call their other family, encourage them to reach out when needed, because it is not your responsibility to understand all of the ins and outs of any of these mental health disorders. There are people who dedicate their entire careers to understanding them, and it is big, and it is absolutely worth knowing your limits, knowing kind of what you can and can't do. And even if you are not in a place where you can be there for somebody who you care about, you can certainly try to make sure that they have somebody else in place, or that they have other resources in place, so that you can also still care for yourself. So don't put yourself on the chopping block for somebody else, so to speak. Okay.
That's a good one.
Just some basic resources. The National Alliance on Mental Health, you guys can look that up on Google. There are a ton of resources on that website related to mental health and just kind of basic information. Lone Star Circle of Care and Integral Care here in Austin are both really good resources for both psychiatric care, crisis care. If you or someone is potentially in danger of hurting themselves or somebody else, right? ATCIC has an emergency line. There's also information down in the front office related to mental health disorders, some mental health disorders, not all of them, and some additional resources. You guys are also always more than welcome to, reach out, send me a text, send me an email, and we can set up a time. Unfortunately, I don't operate as an emergency care provider in this role. And so at the end of the day, if somebody is actively trying to hurt themselves, always call 911. You know, if they've locked themselves in a bathroom and they have a knife or something and they're threatening to hurt themselves, call 911. Like that is like, you may not be able to get them out of that situation, but you're also not trained for it, and that is perfectly okay, right? Like not everybody is trained for that. We all have a role, and that's a scary place to be. And as far as additional resources, we will probably be adding to this. And I, like, as always, like I will always help you guys navigate health insurance and stuff like that if needed. Okay. Basic contact information for us that you guys see on absolutely everything. But please feel free to contact me if you have any questions, comments, and or feedback, right? If there's anything major that we missed here or that didn't make sense, please feel free to let us know. We can always go in and kind of tweak the presentation and re-upload it. We are planning on at least a couple of times a year having these YouTube videos kind of be open for people to come in and like watch again. But thank you guys so much for watching, and we look forward to our next presentation. Have a good day.